Welcome to Zen Times 10, Cultivating Softness in Hard Times. We will begin very shortly in being able to talk about just exactly how to be able to recognize that softness is not in any respect a weakness. In fact, it's a flexibility. It's a ability to adapt and adjust. And that in hard times, it becomes important to recognize the importance of being fluid and adaptive and adjusting rather than rigid and resisting. So we will begin in a moment or two being able to explore this in more depth and just exactly what does it mean. Unfortunately, these days, softness is being viewed as a weakness, when in reality, when we look at the role of softness, we see how incredibly powerful it really is. So we, if some of you have seen on the Zen Times Facebook, that this whole notion of water being fluid, being flexible, not resisting or fighting against, but moving with and around, has tremendous, tremendous power. So we're going to explore that tonight. So our topic is cultivating softness in hard times. These are hard times, no doubt, filled with confusion and anger and resistance, and this versus that. And as we have talked about in previous Zen times, when we begin to separate ourselves from how things are evolving and emerging in our lives, we create great suffering. When we divide things between this and that, and right and wrong, and up and down, and in and out, and all those kinds of things, we forget the importance of recognizing that how situations and experiences and moments emerge in our lives calls upon us to cultivate wise and adaptive and helpful ways to respond. We may not always know the right way to do that, but we can take the time to take counsel in our inner awareness, in our inner wisdom, in what our heart knows to be true, and move forward from that. The image of water can be very, very instructive in our journey. It reminds us, and in all of our Zen Time sessions, I always talk about the importance of reminding, coming back to remember what is essential. Coming back to remember our basic essence of who we are as human beings. And so it is a matter of understanding that the things around us, and water is one of them, and I'm using that as a metaphor tonight. It can be any number of things. It could be clouds, it could be wind, it can be the trees, but I'm using the idea of water. Not only is it necessary for all life, but it's very instructive. When you look at a stream moving down its course, any obstacle that it comes up against it doesn't become rigid and hard and fight against that. It recognizes that that obstacle is there. It recognizes that its response is to recognize and move around that with fluidity. When we see turbulent water, lots of waves crashing up on the shore, we recognize that on the surface it's turbulent, but in its depths it's still. So water can both be turbulent and still at the same time. And oftentimes moving through our experiences in our lives can be rather turbulent. That's just how things evolve in our lives. It can be frightening, it can be scary, it can be confusing. It can be any number of things. It can be joyful, it can be exciting, it can be adventuresome. So it's not a matter of what the experience is as much as it is what we bring to it, how we respond, how we come up against perhaps obstacles or frustrations or fears or uncertainties, and learn how to respond and adapt in important and meaningful ways. And so when confronted with hard times, it is important to, as I have said in previous Zen times, it is important to come back home. Take a deep breath. Come back here to our center. Trust in our own innate wisdom. Trust in our own innate knowing. And then move into the situation, being fluid, being adaptive, being understanding. The situation may not change, but how we respond to it will make all the difference in the world in the midst of a conflict, for example. We may find ourselves getting tense and tight and pushing up against the conflict. That's not how water works. That's not the lesson of cultivating softness in hard times. But our innate, our responsive, our reflexive reaction is to tighten up and push up against what is a conflict. Perhaps it might stem from fear of rejection or criticism. It might stem from our ego. We've talked in the last several times about the role of our ego as being an obstacle. And our ego may say, oh, wait a minute, I've got to prove myself right. And so there's a lot of ways that we reflexively react to obstacles that come up in our lives. And we forget about the importance of being in the midst of how to be able to respond with fluidity, with being adaptive, and offering the very best response we possibly can. And we all have that kind of reflexive reactiveness. We all do. It's part of our kind of survival makeup that if we view something as threatening, we tighten up and we feel like we have to fight against it. When you look at many of the, for example, the martial arts, many of them have to do not with combatively going after a threat, but using the energy of that to neutralize the situation. So that calls upon us to really step back and ask ourselves, stay with what is hard, what is uncomfortable. Soften in our response to it. Take a deep breath and remind yourself, how can I move up towards this obstacle, this threat, this difficulty, this hardness, with a great sense of fluidity. What is the best way I can respond to this? And so it calls upon us to step back and recognize our natural kind of reaction to want to go after that difficulty or that hard times or what have you with our own hardness, rather than stepping back and allowing what is emerging in our lives to call upon us to move up towards it and around it. Now, maybe sometimes it might be agreeing with maybe you're having a conflict with an individual, for example. Being able to agree with the person by validating what is true for them. It may not be true for you, may not be anywhere near, but be able to come up and say, I can see how that is important to you. And how that can allow you to move around the conflict, being more adaptive and being more fluid. When things aren't occurring the way we want them to be, for example, our health. It can be either getting really resistant and angry and tense about it, or be able to say, what are some of the things that I can acknowledge about this that will soften the stress, soften the tension? How can I breathe into what's difficult? Now, that's not what we're typically, taught about when you look at sports and combat and those kinds of things. It's always about hardness against hardness, bashing against each other. So innately, this goes against our common sense, so to speak, of, well, wait a minute, if I don't meet hardness with hardness, I'm going to be trampled. Tell that to a river. Tell that to the ocean. Tell that to the waves. And think about what water does. It can take a rock and turn it into tiny little granules of sand. Yes, it takes time, but it's still the process of how to be able to work with what is going on so that we can adjust and adapt more completely with how to be very present with what is going on, recognizing our tendency to want to be hard and difficult about it, and ask ourselves, how can I be fluid like water? How can I be adaptive like water? So one of the things I'm going to have us do right now in our session is I'd like everybody just to get comfortable. Relax the shoulders. Relax the jaw. Gosh, so much tension in our jaw. And move our neck around, get some of those muscles relaxed. And bring our attention to where we may be sitting, or laying, and just notice what it's like to be where you are. No resistance, no tension, just relaxing into each breath. And the wonderful thing about our breath is that it too is very fluid. Inhaling, exhaling. Inhaling, exhaling. Our heartbeat also is very fluid. Beyond our conscious awareness, it is constantly beating at a sense, at a rhythm that makes the most sense for the supply of blood and oxygen and nutrients. So all around us is fluidity. The air, the birds flying in the sky, the clouds, the planets moving around the sun, and on and on and on. There's great motion all the time. It's human beings that grasp onto a sense of rigidity and resistance when confronted with the difficult. So as you get comfortable, pay attention to everything you may be hearing. Just notice it without a label, without a judgment, without a resistance, just that it's there. And you are in the midst of that. Notice everything you might be seeing if your eyes were open. Without judgment or resistance, just noticing that you are amidst everything that you're seeing. Notice everything you're feeling. It might be fullness from a meal, or worry, or anxiety, any number of kind of physical or emotional feelings. Just notice them, that they're there, and you are amidst them. Just allow yourself to settle into being in the midst of all that is occurring around you, recognizing that you are an integral part of all of that also. So bring your attention to your breath. Watch, just watch. No resistance, no trying to do some sort of breath exercise that you may have learned. Just watch it. Watch how you are being breathed. We do this about 17,000 times a day. When we're awake, when we're driving, when we're eating a meal, when we're sleeping. It just, the flow of oxygen in and the flow of oxygen out. Or carbon dioxide, I should say, coming out. Easy rhythm. And with each breath in and each exhalation, a gratitude that someday you won't have that. But right now you do. Each heartbeat, bringing in oxygen or blood from around the body, pumping out blood to the lungs, all around to our brains and the organs, refreshed with oxygen and nutrients. Someday we won't have that either, but right now we do. Recognize that even though our ego mind, our small mind, wants to make big deals out of things, life is constantly flowing, adapting, moving, adjusting. And our breath and our heartbeat are wonderful reminders about that. So pay attention to that. Gentle rhythm. That gift given to us. Each heartbeat, each breath. And with each breath, a deeper sense of comfort, relaxation, a settling into being amidst It's the flow, the rhythm, the movement. And in your next in-breath, take a deep breath in and release it. And let the out-breath go all the way down to its completion. And we've done this each time in Zen times. But it's a powerful reminder, breathing in, taking it in, and then releasing all the way down. Just resting in that pause for a moment. Really beginning to feel the rhythm, the flow, the movement of our breath. Breathing in, breathing out. And with each out breath, just continue to bring your awareness to that releasing, that letting go, that returning, that returning to that place of calm and comfort. Now take your left hand and place it over your heart. And your right hand, place it over just above your navel. And just stay with holding your breath and your heartbeat. And perhaps as you return to each pause at the end of each out breath, you're reminded of the subtlety of the flow of your breath. You may even begin to feel the beating of your heart. This is where we remind ourselves. So stay with us, feeling that comfortable rhythm of the in-breath and the releasing all the way back down to the pause at the end of the out-breath. And how your heart is also an integral part of this flow. This is where we remind ourselves to always be like water. Cultivate that adaptiveness, that fluidity, that movement in the midst of all that comes our way. How to flow through situations, not up against them or resist them or become rigid against them, but how to flow and move through situations with the trust of your breath, of your heartbeat, the trust of your innate wisdom, your own internal voice, responding with clarity to any situation. This may not change the hard times around us, whether they're global or personal, but it certainly changes how we are in the midst of them. Profoundly, how we are in the midst of them. Keeping our hands over our heart and our breath. Remembering, as we talked about last time, be a verb. Be a verb. We define ourselves as a noun, it becomes rigid. Being a verb reminds us of motion, being adaptive, being fluid, being constructive and interactive rather than resistant. Okay, now take a nice deep breath. Begin to bring yourself back to a conscious awareness. And so when we look at be like water, it reminds us to watch how quickly we harden against situations and to smile and recognize that we're human. We have that reflexive reaction. And recognize how the next breath, our next heartbeat will remind us profoundly to listen to our own internal voice and respond with clarity to any situation, to respond, to move through, around, and beyond difficult situations. Now, certainly we're surrounded with a lot of hardness, culturally and socially and politically and environmentally. And we're being called upon about how to respond to those things with the strength of softness, the strength of clarity in terms of how we respond. Our practice doesn't make life easy. That's one of the pitfalls that you see in Western interpretation of meditation and contemplative practices. It makes it sound like that if you do A, B, C, and D, that things will become easy. Well, I wish that were basically true. It doesn't make things anything. It makes us something different in the midst of those things. It doesn't make child rearing any easier. It doesn't make getting stuck in traffic when you're late for a meeting any easier. It doesn't make interpersonal conflict or health concerns any easier. What it does do is it makes a profound impact on how we are in the midst of all of that, how we can really cultivate our sense of be like water, adaptive, flexible. So one of the things I would encourage you to do between now and our next Zen times is to ask yourself, in the midst of whatever situation is creating a sense of resistance or hardness in you, how can I be like water? How can I be in the midst of what is occurring and be fluid, adaptive, not rigid or reactive? And what is that going to look like? It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. But it is necessary. And it is important. So I would encourage you to watch how that happens. Continue your journaling. Use your life as the canvas upon which you begin to allow new things to emerge. And what kind of new things begin to emerge is as we begin to recognize how our ego functions and how our sense of not good enough functions, and how our resistance and hardness function. As we've talked about, and just step back from that and say, how can I move through this like water? Well, this will be the end of our Zen times tonight. And like I said, make sure you continue this work as your days unfold and situations move into your experiences, and how you can apply what we've been focusing on in this and in past Zen times. And as always, if you missed this one, that's fine. It will still be on the Zen Times website. I am posting these on YouTube as well. So have a good evening, and be like